Hello and welcome to another tutorial. Today we're going to be looking at the remove button and the item description. So now you can see if I hover over an item, it's going to tell me that it's a steak and gives me 10 food, and the stone is just used for crafting recipes, and the berry gives me 25 health, and it just dynamically appears, disappears, and the crafting tab, we're going to dynamically figure out the amount and write the text. So an arrow recipe gives me an arrow but removes 2 wood, and the bow recipe removes 1 wood, 1 stone, and gives me a bow. Awesome. If you haven't seen the previous tutorials, there's a link to the playlist down below, and I would highly recommend you do watch them. So yeah, let's get into it. And as always, you can get this scene and the end scene from the links down below. So first up, let's work on the remove button. So open up our item slot script and let's add a new function. Let's make a public void on remove button clicked. And all we want to do in here is just check if the item is not null. If it is not null, just go to the inventory.instance and call the remove item function and pass in the item that we have equipped in this slot. That's it for the remove button script, and let's go back to Unity. Let's go to 2D mode and go to our canvas and the inventory parent and activate that. Double click to focus on it and expand the inventory tab, the inventory scroll view, and the viewport and content. And let's go to our prefabs and duplicate this item prefab by clicking Ctrl D or Curl D. Rename this to, let's call this the inventory slot, and call the other one the crafting slot prefab. Crafting slot prefab will stay the same, no changes here, but for the inventory slot, drag and drop it in the content here, and we can also rename the content to inventory parent or slot parent. And once we have it in here, create a new UI and go to button right here. Expand the button, delete the text part, and all we want to do here is set up a sprite. I imported a new sprite, so you can get these files from the links down below, as I mentioned earlier, and go to 2D and UI and just hit apply right here. And for the button, just drag and drop it in the sprite slot right there, and let's resize it to something like 25 by 25. And select this tool and move it to the top right. So, and it's important that this is a child of the inventory slot prefab so that we can click on it, so it has priority over the actual unused button. And now go to the button and on the onClick event, click the plus sign, drag in the inventory slot prefab, the parent of the button, and let's rename this also to remove button. Now just select a function, go to function, item slot, and then on remove button clicked right there. And what we have to do here, which is very important, click on the item slot, inventory slot prefab, and we're on the top right here under the layer, we have the override and we have to apply all and then delete this. So that's quite awesome. Now we need to change stuff in the inventory UI script, so double click to open it up. And now that we have different buttons for the inventory slots and the crafting slots, we also need 2 different prefabs for instantiating. So let's rename this first prefab we have here to inventory slot prefab, and also make another prefab, a public game object, and let's call this crafting slot prefab. And now we still need to change functions. So for the setup crafting recipe, we want to instantiate a crafting slot prefab. And down here we want to instantiate a inventory slot prefab, inventory right there. So save that and let's try it out. We should be good to go. Now go back to Unity, go to your canvas and set up the references. So go to prefabs, and for the inventory slot prefab, just drag the inventory slot prefab and the crafting slot prefab right under that. Now deactivate the inventory parent right here and start the game. So if I open the inventory and press a couple times X, we see the button appears with the little X here. And if I go to the crafting tab, there's no X. We cannot delete our crafting items. Now if I click on the little X right here, the item just disappears. And I can still use it and use up the steak and the berries, and I can still delete the items right there. And I can still add more and delete as I want to. So that's the delete button. Now let's work on the item description. what we want to do here is just go to the canvas, go to UI, and create a panel. Now let's downsize that panel quite a bit right there, and then rename the panel to, let's say, item info text. Now go to the item info text and create the 2 UI text right here and duplicate that. And the first text is going to be the item name, and the second text is going to be the item description. Click on the first text and just drag it up here, and then select the rect tool by clicking T. Click on it, hold Alt, and then like that, and just center it right here. And let's select a different font. Let's make a Roboto bold for that, and also let's call this, let's say, raw steak, and size it up a little bit like that. Okay, 25 maybe. It's awesome. So now go to the item description and resize it to fit it right here and right here. And now let's just try some text out. Let's say like plus 10 health and plus 25 stamina. Awesome. And we can also, again, we can select the Roboto bolts here and probably size it up to like 20. Okay, that's too big. Let's go for like 18. And line spacing 1.125 or 1.2. Go to your scripts folder and create a new C# script. Let's call this the item info script. So item info. And double click to open it up. Let's delete all of this, and let's also add a using statement using Unity engine.ui. Let's make 2 public texts. The first one is going to be the item name, and the second public text is going to be the let's call this the item description. Let's make a public void setup and pass in 2 strings. Let's call the first one the name and the second one description. What we want to do in here is the item name is going to be equal to the .text is going to be equal to the name which we pass in, and the item description .text is going to be equal to the description. Like so, and this is it for this script. And just let's set it up in Unity. So go to Unity, go to your item info text, and once you select it, then just drag and drop the item info script on it, and the item name is going to be the item name, and the item description is going to be item description. Now go to your prefabs folder, drag and drop it down here, and then delete it from the scene, like so. The next thing we need is to get a description for each item. Go to your scripts folder and open the item script, the base item script. And let's make a new function, a public virtual void again. And let's call this get item description. Let's also make a new public string and call this item description. And let's set it equal to, let's say, used for crafting. Like that. And what we want to do in the get item description function, we just want to return the item description. And this is not going to be a void, this is going to be a string, obviously. Let's go back to Unity and go to our game manager right here, open it up in Visual Studio. And what do we need? So we need a public transform for the canvas, because we want to child the description panel to the canvas. And then we also want a item info prefab. So let's make a public game object, an item info prefab, and then also make a private game object, and let's call this the current item info, and let's set this equal to null. Once we instantiate the item info prefab, we want to then set this up to the instantiated item info prefab so that we can actually delete it once we don't need it anymore. So now let's make 2 public functions. Let's make a public void display item info. So what we want in here is we want to take a string, the item name. Then we also want a string for the item description. And a vector 2 for the button position. So if we hover over a button with our mouse, then we want the button to call this function to display the item that is on the button. So that's why we need the button position, so that we can then set up the the item info prefab correctly. So let's just check if the current item is equal to null. It always should be equal to null. So let's check if it's not equal to null. Then we want to destroy the item. What we want to do in here, just the current item info. Since it's null, it's going to be equal to the instantiate function. And what we want to do in here is just instantiate the item info prefab. And we want to instantiate it the button position for now. And then quaternion identity, we don't want to rotate it. And the last one is the parent, as we can see. And this is just going to be canvas right there. And then we want to get the current item info dot get component, and each item info prefab has the item info script so that we can actually set it up. And right here, and dot setup function. So we want to call the setup function in the item info script. So just pass in the string name, so this is the item name, and then pass in the item description, like so. And that's it for now for this function, and also make a public void, and we want to destroy the item info. Now, if the current item info is not equal to null, then we can actually destroy something so that we don't get a null reference. So if it's not equal to null, then just go in here and destroy the current item info dot game object. Go back to Unity, and now the item slot has to actually call the game object, the game manager, right, to actually spawn it. So let's make a function. Let's call this public void, and let's call this on cursor enter. And then we also need a public void on cursor exit. So in here we want to display the item info. So go to your game manager dot instance and dot display item info, and pass in the item dot name, and also the item dot get item description, and this is a function, and also the transform dot position. This is the position of the button. And on the cursor exit, just game manager dot instance dot destroy item info. So now we also need to call this, since we can see here 0 references, we need to call it somehow. So go to Unity, go to a prefab folder, go to your let's open the inventory slot button first, and let's add a component. Let's add a event trigger, and in the event trigger we want to add a new event type. Let's make this pointer enter, and then also an event time pointer exit. And what we want to do in here, click the 2 plus signs here and drag and drop the inventory slot script in here for this button. And then for the function, go to item slot, and here on cursor enter, and here on the exit, go just to item slot and on cursor exit. So this is going to take care of calling these functions. And let's go right click this and copy component, and go to your crafting slot prefab and right click here and paste component as new. And just to be sure, just do this and this. Just drag and drop these 2 things in here again. The item slot has to be dragged and dropped in here freshly, and then go to item slot again and on cursor enter, and then item slot and on cursor exit. Now we still need to go to our game manager and the item info prefab and the canvas. So the canvas is in here, and the item info prefab is just this text game object. And no, if we start the game, we should be able to see an item description, but it's not going to be perfect at all. It's going to be hovering and shivering and whatnot. So now if I go in here, we see it pops up for a second and then it disappears. This is because if we hover over it, the button will register the, the mouse. But once the text appears, it will unregister the mouse that I just hovered over it. So we actually need to move this item description to the left, and probably to the left top, so it just looks nicely. So I could just put in some magic numbers, and if you want to do that, just skip forward. But I'll show you how I actually got to those numbers. So open up your game manager script, and let's make 2 public variables. Let's make a public float, and let's call this move x. And let's set it equal to 0, and then make a public float move y. And let's set that equal to 0 too. Now these 2 variables, we want to add them here to the button position. The button position dot x and plus equal, and what was it called, and move x, and then the button position dot y is going to also be plus equal the move y right here. So now if we go to Unity, we can see in the game manager the two floats appear. And now if we start the game, we can just work our way up to perfect values. So if you have a different setup, just go for it. So let's spawn some items with the X button and now hover over it, and this looks dreadful. So let's move it on the Y-axis. We're probably going to move it upwards, so let's add like 60 to it. Now we can already see that it looks way better. We don't see the flickering anymore. So let's add let's make it 80. And now if we click in here, still not enough. So let's make it like 95. And that's pretty good. Let's go for 100, and it's perfect on the Y. And now we need to move the X-axis to the left. So just go to the move X and let's say minus, let's say 80. Okay, we still need a little bit more. So let's go like 1 minus 160 and still a little bit more, 180. Okay, that's perfect. So now if we hover over items, we see on the left top that it's describing the item. If you go to the crafting tab, used for crafting, and here used for crafting. So that's good. And now remember those values, the 180 and 100, and just exit the game. Go to Visual Studio and then just put in here the move X was 180 and it was a minus right here, and the Y was plus 100. Save that, go to Unity and still open your prefabs, and I wasn't really happy with the alpha of it, and so go to your info text, and for the alpha just bump it up to like, let's say 200, and yeah, it looks decent. And also the item description text, let's move it up to the right a little bit so it's not at the border. That's good. And now save it, play it, and let's see what it looks like. So now when you look at it, now we can see it even if we hover over an item, and we have a perfectly working item description. It shows the name and then the string. Now we can also change the item strings. Let's go to our items, and the arrow, let's write something as used as ammo for bow. Now go to the bow and used for shooting stuff. Food item. Let's leave the recipes on, okay? Go to the food item and let's make like something like plus 10 food. Go to the health item and again plus 25 health. Go to the stone item, used for crafting, that's good, and used for crafting, that's also good. If we start the game now, and then we see for the steak plus 10 food, and for the berry plus 25 health, and nothing has changed over here. So let's now work on the recipes, so that the description, we don't really use this string, but we dynamically figure out the recipes. So go to our scripts folder, go to our crafting recipe, and now since we had a virtual void, we can override it. So let's just go in here, and so just go public override string get item description. We do not want the base, so we'll delete that, and let's make a string, and let's make a items ingredients. And make that equal to a empty string. So now let's make a for each loop, and since we've made it a couple times in here, I'm just gonna be lazy and copy it. So we want to go through all the ingredients right here, and just item ingredients plus equals, and let's make a minus since we are removing items, then a space, then just add the ingredient.amount, and plus a space, plus an ingredient dot name item, item dot name, and plus a \n, which is a new line. And then just return the item, the item ingredients list here. And now when we start the game, have a couple of items in here and go to the crafting tab, we see -2 wood, and here we see -1 wood and -2 stone for the bow recipe. If we go to our inventory, nothing has changed here. Steak gives us 10 health, 10 food. And we can delete items and click on berries and just see what the recipe is made out of. Bow recipe, we need 1 wood and 2 stone. Awesome. that's it for this tutorial. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, leave a like, and if you want me to do anything special, just leave a comment down below. And yeah, see you in the next one. Bye.